And I believe we are rolling.
Okay.
So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Josie Moore, and joining me tonight is Jeff Johnson, who is a Democratic candidate for Ohio's 11th congressional district. Thank you for joining us, Jeff. I'm really happy you're here, that you can make it.
Thank you for having me. This will be fun, being able to, let's talk about the issues.
So this forum is hosted by the Cleveland Heights Progressives. We are a volunteer activist community in Cleveland Heights, Ohio, working to bring about progressive political change in our area. And we are really happy to be doing these forums with as many candidates who could join us, because we believe that one of the keys, the pillars of democracy, is voters being able to make informed choices. And in order to do that, we need to have really thoughtful conversations with as many candidates as we can have. And so that's what these forums are for. So we're just going to dive in. We're just going to skip formalities. So I hope you're ready. So first of all, we know that every single person running in this race has their own strengths, their own values and experiences that shape them as a candidate and sets them apart. At the end of tonight's forum, what are the three things that you hope that people will come away from this to know about you?
Well, number one, first of all, I do want to thank the Cleveland Heights Progressives. I'm sure I know a great amount of you guys. I just need to look at the list and see who's all part of it. I am a member of the Progressive Caucus, the Northeast Ohio chapter, and haven't had a chance to really interact with Cleveland Heights. But the three things, number one is my preparation. The three things I want folks to know about me out of this, after this discussion tonight, is that he's prepared. What I mean by that is that I have 30 years of experience in public service. And of those 30 years, 23 of them have been in elective office. I have served 9 years as an Ohio State Senator. And during those years, I actually represented Cleveland Heights as part of my district of 330,000 people. And then I also spent 14 years as a Cleveland City Council person, 5.5 during the late 80s, and then came back in 2014 and did another 8 years as City Council of Cleveland. I left council in 2018. So preparation is very, very big when you're talking about going to a level of government such as Congress. The other preparation part is my qualification, education-wise. I am an attorney, and I also have a master's in political science along with my law degree from Case Western Reserve. And I have a bachelor's degree in telecommunications from Kent State University. So taking the time to go out and getting educated. So preparation, and then my vision. So my vision for the second thing would be, what is my vision? And I hope through tonight, folks will see what my vision is. And my values, I value commitment and hard work, independence, fearlessness. So those are the three things: preparation, valuing commitment and hard work, and then my vision are the three things.
Thank you so much. So with that in mind, so our nation is facing so many crises right now and so many problems that need remedies. It can be hard to figure out where to start. So if you are elected, what actions will you prioritize and work toward the moment you step foot in Congress?
I think the 11th congressional district, first of all, is one of the most diverse in many ways, not just racially, but also economically. In the 11th district, we range from poverty to prosperity. You have to have the ability as a congressperson to recognize that. Significant poverty, when it comes to the city of Cleveland and the city of Akron, the greater Cleveland, greater Akron area, you're talking about 25, 26, 27% poverty rate. In the African-American community, it goes around 40 to close to 40, 43%. So poverty is a problem. So you have to be able to hit the ground running, talking about how to close the wage gap, how to be able to provide true job training, vocational education, helping to individuals to lift themselves out of poverty. I believe you have to have a strong labor movement in order to be able to talk about helping people to move out of poverty as well. But in addition to that, those who are doing well or pre-COVID was doing well, I think you also have to look at small business support. You have to be able to support the entrepreneurial spirit of this district. And you have to be able to talk about investments in underutilized areas. So that's one of the major things I would do is look at the economics of the district and really focus in on that. And there's a lot of subcategories when you talk about economics, when you're talking about closing a wage gap. I supported $15 minimum wage, $15 an hour. I led that fight along with SEIU in Cleveland, but it was stopped. We tried to get it on the ballot. So I would do that as a congressperson as well. And again, I really believe in the need to strengthen the union movement by strengthening the National Labor Relations Board, stopping illegal activity, is stopping folks from being able to collectively bargain. My mother and father were union members of the Postal Union, so I grew up in the union movement, and I really believed in the ability of how collective bargaining agreements help people to advance themselves economically. So that's economics, but let me just, because of the other questions, healthcare, you've got to be able to hit healthcare as well. After I do economics, I would focus in on how to fulfill our promise. Everyone believes healthcare, almost everyone believes healthcare is a right. So how does that happen? Well, we have a healthcare question, so I'm not going to delve into that, but that'll be one of my actions as well. And criminal justice reform, and we'll be talking about that as well. Those are the three kind of major areas. And how can you forget education, public education? But I think we'll be able to talk about all those. But those are the action steps that I would like to do, hitting ground. I believe I would be able to hit the ground running given my experience and my knowledge of legislative. The other thing is I served in all three branches of local government. I was a councilman, I was a member of the Jane Campbell's mayoral cabinet. And also I am now the court administrator for the housing court. And I also, like I told you, I worked in local and state government. So I think I can hit the ground running to be able to do those action steps because of my the breadth of my experience and the depth of my experience.
Thank you. And so let's dive into healthcare. So just to give everyone some context about the healthcare situation, we're just going to throw a bunch of numbers at you. So in 2019, the U.S. spent $3.8 trillion on healthcare, and this is an increase from 2018 of 4.6%, which is double the rate of inflation. And of course, I don't even want to know what the numbers are going to come out for 2020. It's going to be huge. But at this rate, we are on track to spend about $50 to $55 trillion on healthcare over the next decade. In 2019, this accounted for 17.7% of our GDP, which is the largest share of GDP spent on healthcare of any nation in the world. And yet it is estimated that around 90 million Americans are either uninsured or underinsured, that about 59% of all bankruptcies in America are due to medical debt, and that each year in America, we lose between 30,000 and 70,000 lives simply because people could not afford health care. How can we fix this? And if elected, how will you work to make that happen?
Well, I know that, in my opinion, the passage of the Affordable Care Act was a major step toward that. And I am a big supporter of the ACA. I think we need to add a public option. I believe we need to be able to, as we transition into providing greater accessibility, affordability, I know that there's a great percentage of folks within the 11th district who have private insurance with their employer, and many, based on a number of conversations over the years, some like it. Many of them like it. And so I support the idea that we allow for folks to make the transition from their employer supported health insurance to a public option in the ACA if they want to. So I'm a big believer in the ACA with a public option. I also think that we need to focus on our attention on the cost of prescription drugs and work toward a true systematic, sustainable reduction in the prescription drug prices. And I think, there's a lot of experts out there with a varying degree of opinions. And I do believe in listening to them and then determining what's right for our district. The fact that people are, like as been stated, bankruptcies that come from debt owed for medical treatment is something that we also should look at in relieving that burden as well. So I don't support Medicare for all. I believe that's too big of a change too fast. And then there's the controversy about true cost and where it falls. So I am a believer in expanding, strengthening the ACA, as well as focusing on prescription drugs.
Thank you so much. And you have said that one of your other legislative priorities is going to be addressing poverty, which is great because right now in America, about 26 million people don't have enough to eat.
Yeah.
On any given night, over 500,000 people are sleeping on the streets, and around 18 million people right now are behind on their rent or their mortgage. And of course, all of this was made worse by the pandemic, but it also preceded the pandemic. In a nation as wealthy as the United States, how would you work to help us achieve economic justice?
For us, by looking at the structural causes of the income gap that exists. There is a significant level of structural racism within our system that has created inequities. And one of the inequities is within economics. Of course, there's housing, there's health, criminal justice, but as well as economics. And you have to attack the structural statement, the have versus have-nots, the whole distribution of income and distribution of resources. So we need to quickly move to raise the minimum wage to $15 an hour. I think the most immediate thing, the fact that you have $7.25 an hour is ridiculous. And I know everyone says this, but it's absolutely true. You should not allow any Americans to work 40 hours a week and still be on public assistance. It's just something fundamentally wrong with that. People need to have a living wage, and whatever it takes structurally within our government and within our private sector, we have to make that happen. And of course, we want to continue to encourage the private sector to continue to make its changes. And some big corporations have done that relative to closing the gap. But there's also the need for a strong educational infrastructure if you really want to talk about dealing with poverty. I'm delighted about what has come out of the America Rescue Plan when it comes to child poverty. The idea that because of this bill, we can take 40% of children out of poverty. It takes bold type of actions like that for us to continue to be able to do that. And so I do support investing in our economics, not with tax cuts for the rich with a trickle-down theory approach, but rather focused on poverty at the level and dealing with the issue of education and its connection to poverty, the issue of wages, livable wages, and being able to provide some of what I consider to be the support systems to help people in poverty, public transportation, dealing with a safer environment. It is multi-layered and it's structural. And I think you have to have that mindset in order to really attack poverty rather than talk about just talking about it. You actually have to dismantle the structure underneath that causes poverty.
Thank you. And I know that one of the contributing factors to a lot of people trying to make ends meet is just for many young people especially, is the amount of student debt burden that they are carrying. In fact, student loan debt in the United States totals around 1.7 trillion and grows 6 times faster than our nation's economy. Currently, we have over 43 million people carrying on average around $40,000 worth of student debt. And with the average public university student borrowing around $30,000 for their bachelor's degree alone, even if all current student debt was wiped out, the national issue of student debt would simply begin again. What should the United States be doing to address this problem?
Well, we need to come to an agreement of how much student debt we're just going to get rid of. And there's a disagreement among the leadership at the national level. President Biden, Senator Sanders, I support that we need to forgive a certain percentage. I'm not there yet about exactly how much I would forgive, but I do believe that it has to be done. And it's probably somewhere between what President Biden and with Senator Sanders are talking about. I also believe in free public access to public college and university, free education, and putting in the system, and a way to pay for it. Of course, you're going to have to talk about raising the taxes on the very rich. We have to find a way to strengthen the infrastructure of our society, and education is the way to do it. And one of the things, when I talked about that large gap between the have and have-nots, one way to close it is to start providing a strong educational structure at the primary, secondary level, but also at the college level, giving free access to public universities and colleges, having it paid for by raising taxes on the very, very rich, so that we begin to have much more of a balancing, because without a doubt, education is the key. I am where I am today because of the education system. I graduated from Cleveland Public School System and ultimately went and got 3 college degrees. And I came from the inner city of Cleveland. So education is a weapon to overcome the potential enemy of poverty and lack of opportunity. So I do believe that we have to focus in on college, remove the debt, and encourage more vocational education as well. I'm a big vocational education person. Not everyone wants to go to college, but we should have pathways by using vocational education. Unfortunately, it's been dismantled in our urban areas at the primary, secondary level, and we have to be able to bring that back.
I absolutely agree that we need to be able to give everyone every opportunity to pursue what is right for them. And since we're talking about education, let's move a little bit earlier. And strong primary and secondary education is indisputably one of the most formidable ways to reduce poverty, crime, and a host of other social problems, as you've already mentioned. And even though 72% of Americans support increasing investments in our high quality childhood education, it remains one of our nation's most underfunded public goods. One of the challenges in this is confronting dominant mindsets about how we ensure that we are providing every child with the education they deserve. We've tried the punitive approach with No Child Left Behind, and we've tried the competitive approach with Race to the Top. As a congressperson, how would you help fulfill America's promise to our school children?
Well, we need to get rid of the unfairness of how we fund schools. And I think you have to return to the idea that public education is the foundation of the educational system in America. We lost that along the way. When I was a state senator in the 90s, the DeRolf decision was agreed to by the Ohio Supreme Court, and that was a funding issue. Unfortunately, particularly the Republicans throughout these years have worked to make sure DeRolf was not totally fulfilled. We basically asked for a fair system. DeRolf said that the way we fund public schools in Ohio was unconstitutional, but it didn't give us it didn't provide us the weapons in order to make it happen. So I believe you have to get rid of the inequities within the education system, where you have public school systems within the inner city, and so far different than those in the suburban areas. Now, you can do that without threatening what many people worry about, is that taking funding from the suburbs. No, it's really about focused on getting away from funding private charter schools and focus on public charter schools and our public school system. The other is a broader understanding of how children succeed in school. By being on the front line as a council member, living in the inner city of Cleveland as well, you understand that you need much more of a holistic approach if you want to educate a child, particularly within the inner city of Akron or Cleveland, because what they bring to the front door of the school building, and that has to be understood. Whether it is they're hungry, whether they have some issues of health related, so you need more and more nurses. Unfortunately, there's a lot of school systems that have more security guards than they have nurses. And you've got to deal with the realities of whatever mental states these children are in, because they live in a community where trauma is not rare, and it is something that they're exposed to. So you need to be able to look at how to deal with educating a child beyond what's on the blackboard. You've got to understand what they're bringing to it. A significant amount of households, for example, are in the inner city, particularly in the inner ring suburbs as well, are female-headed households. There's something where a mother is trying to work and trying to help educate the child. So it's a broader approach that I recognize. And so it's more than me just saying we need more money for public schools, but we also need a better, more expansive strategy that really deals with the health needs of the child, and any other social needs of the child. And be sure, I'm a big supporter of teachers and the teachers union. And I'm one of the ones who point to you that teachers made a difference in my life. So we do have to support the teachers. We have to support the support staff in the schools. And you've got to be able to help them to have the resources to do their jobs and not have to take their own money to do it.
Yeah, teachers were pivotal, excuse me. Teachers were pivotal in my own life as well, recognizing needs in me that were beyond just book learning. So
they inspire.
They are on the forefront of shaping the next generation. And
exactly.
You mentioned something about the security guards in the school, and there's been a lot of talk about school to prison pipelines. So we're just going to segue into criminal justice. And the House of Representatives, as you know, recently passed the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, which, if it's passed in the Senate and signed into law by President Biden, it would, among other things, ban controversial police tactics and ease the way for lawsuits against officers who violate citizens' constitutional rights. If this is made law, do you think this does enough to ensure justice in our criminal justice system? And if not, what else should be done?
Oh, it's definitely not enough, but it's significant. If you're talking about criminal justice reform, there are different aspects of the criminal justice system that we need to reform. It's not just the police, but let's talk about the police, because obviously that's where a lot of our attention is at. Absolutely support the George Floyd Act, would have voted for it. Get rid of chokeholds. We got to be able to have the ability of police to be more accountable. So I'm glad they now allow for the ability to do lawsuits. You've got to understand that when it comes to spending money with the police, we spend about $100 billion a year in the United States on police services, and we're still not getting it right. We need to be able to redistribute how the resources on how we deal with policing and public safety. We have to redefine what we believe what public safety is. I don't like the term defund the police. You'll never hear me use that. But I do support the redistribution of resources. I do not want, I don't care how much we try to train officers. We need more than the officers showing up when you have issues of mental health, when you have to deal with citizens who, in a way who, when there's mental health issues. Tanisha Anderson, for example, in the city of Cleveland, when a parent calls and says, they're having a mental break, we need to have a much more crisis partnership, a crisis team that shows up. So I believe in distributing money in the behavioral health area, because addiction is an issue as well. I believe we need to understand how to use money relative to youth development. And so, as well as, again, I'm going to use the term again, and you might be, folks might be, it's all structural. And so, even police, when you really ask them, don't believe that they are capable of doing all that we ask of them. And even though, for example, the city of Cleveland has been under a court order for them to expand mental health training, for example, and de-escalation training, it's more surface. It doesn't go down enough. So I would do redistribution. I would bring in much more other professionals to assist police officers on certain calls. They over-police because the majority of folks who are arrested are low-level, or for low-level crimes, drugs, drug use, alcohol, but so that's over-policing. The under-policing is when you notice that really policing is not deterring violent crime. We have significant levels of violent crime in the greater Akron, greater Cleveland areas, which includes some of the suburbs as well. And so you have to be able to figure out how to deal with violent crime by providing police what's necessary, including making sure the cameras are being used and what have you, having training, de-escalation, and recruiting better, choosing better people to be officers. And that's a challenge if we need to do that. And let me say, bail reform is something I'm big on, but also the prison system. When I was a state senator, I supported prison reform. I had a legislation. I was a big advocate for prison reform. I was also a member of the statewide sentencing commission, which we changed the sentencing laws. In my own life, if folks know my life story, I received a second chance. I wouldn't be here without receiving a second chance after making mistakes 20-some years ago. And we have to provide pathways for individuals for second chances, not warehouse them, be able to provide programs, legitimate support systems when they come out, talk about legitimate reentry programs, and be able to understand that those who are in prison, the vast majority are at a low education level, and there's usually addiction and some mental health issues involved. You have to understand what you have in the prisons in order to reform the prisons and the jails as well. But I'll stop there because that is a big issue that it was multi-layered prosecutorial, grand jury system. All of that needs to be looked at. Over prosecuting with higher charges so that you can make folks plead to a lesser adjusted because they're afraid of death when they may have not committed what they are being accused of. So there's a lot of reform that has to be done within the criminal justice system.
It's hard to know where to start there on such a giant problem.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to talk about another giant problem, but one that's much different. And this is actually a problem that is near and dear to my heart. This is my #1 voting issue. So with each passing season, we see more and more evidence that the climate crisis is not something we're trying to prevent from happening in the future, but rather that it is here. It's happening now, and it's only getting worse and quickly. From extreme weather events culminating in large-scale disasters, which cost a lot of money, to the growing displacement of people, both from outside and within the United States, to the mounting costs of reacting to and recovering from the impacts of our changing climate. We cannot continue to ignore this crisis. Yeah. What should the United States be doing about it, and how, if elected, will you help make that happen?
Well, we need to obviously be in a Paris agreement. unfortunately, the decision back in 2015 to do it, most of the countries are not actually doing fulfilling what they need to do to get to the level that we need to get to, that we've agreed to get to. I know what we're trying to do by 2030, and we're trying to be at net zero emissions in 2050. That has to be our goal in the United States of America. But we ultimately need to do more in order to even reach that. I believe in solar. I believe in wind. I believe that we have to deal with our carbon footprint. I like what President Biden is talking about when it comes to the electric, moving more toward non-fossil fuel economy, where cars don't have to, more electric cars. And even though I have not signed on to the Green New Deal, I'm more closer to President Biden on the issue of what his plan is for the environment. We got to get to net zero in 2050. We have to understand that if this can be done without losing jobs, but rather gaining jobs. But I understand also the fossil fuel industry, there's a transitional period that we have to be conscious of. Those who are working in the coal mines, those who are working in the areas that we're trying to move away from, we have to find and make sure they come with us. And so that's important as well. And global warming is real. I believe in it. I've known it. I see it. And the scientists need to be at the table. But again, that in 2015, November 2015, when we thought with the agreement that we were going to be able to have a pathway, we just aren't. Most countries are falling short, and we just need to get back on track in order to make our goals in 2050. So that's what concerns me. But we need to invest in clean energy, and we need to be able to do it as a state level as well as a national level. And the city of Cleveland and the other municipalities all need to be partners in order to move through that. And I know there's also issues of the fact that we have a great lake here that needs to be cleaned. I grew up in Glenville. I still live in Glenville, and I grew up in Glenville, Collinwood, which was a walk. I could walk to Lake Erie from my home because I live right where the cultural gardens are at in Rockefeller Park. So the joy is walking to the water. And so as we talk about the environment and climate change, we particularly also need to deal with the Great Lakes and making sure that this freshwater asset remains that. And I'm a big proponent of that, growing up near it.
I'm so grateful to be living near such a beautiful lake and to have it nearby, and it is a place of peace and life. So there's a lot to be done when it comes to transitioning. We have, as you said, we have a fossil fuel dependent economy, and we need to just shift our entire infrastructure. Speaking of, America's infrastructure report card gives America a C-, which, I mean, if my kids came home with a C-, I wouldn't be happy. Right. So, despite the fact that a whopping 80% of Americans support rebuilding our nation's crumbling infrastructure, and that these investments have a high economic multiplier, our legislators balk at spending public money on rebuilding our nation's infrastructure. Here in the Cleveland East Side area, many cities are facing big bills coming due as our water and sewer infrastructure is being cited for not being EPA compliant and is failing in multiple ways. What can be done both in the short and the long term to address this pressing emergency?
Well, we need to reestablish the partnership between the federal government and the local governments. We have, because that's what's been, as as a person who worked, as I said before, both at the executive level with Mary Jane Campbell, as well as a city council person, I know how it looks when you have a federal partner that actually is at the table with you with resources, and not trying to rebuild a system on the back of the consumer, of the citizen, when it comes to what they pay for the rates. Of course, ultimately, the federal money comes from us as well. But you need to be able to have the federal government at the table. The last 4 years, of course, they have not been there when it comes to the issue of infrastructure, notwithstanding what they said they wanted to do. They never really did that. So I'm looking forward to the Biden administration to be able to provide us with financial resources to go with strategic planning that is credible and legitimate, that actually achieves our goals of a water system that is reliable and sustainable. Now, we've seen in Michigan, we've seen other areas, when you have a system that is unreliable, ultimately it leads to harm when it comes to the drinking water. And you saw what happened in Texas with situations with their problems down there that ultimately dealt with their water as well. So I think that's the key. I also believe that we need to make the commitment, and I'm hearing, Speaker of the House Pelosi and the Majority Leader Schumer, they're all talking about this infrastructure bill that's coming down. So while we're able to do the infrastructure bill, we're also able to have folks hired, and so it actually, there's an employment part of this that is beneficial to our community as well, the hiring of it. So I look forward to, and I'm encouraged by what I'm hearing in Washington. I really believe that this can happen. Now, I'm concerned about the filibuster when it comes to that, but I want to add to it, in addition to the roads and bridges, I want to add the whole idea of the technological infrastructure. I think whenever we talk about infrastructure, we should be expanding it to discuss technology, because of the digital gap that exists within inner cities of Akron, Cleveland, and the inner suburbs. In my neighborhood that I'm at right now, I was part of my community was part of a redlining when it came to digital, and we're part of the digital divide. There's very limited access of choice. Ultimately, I think we need to have free access to the internet. I think we ultimately have to get there. So when we talk about infrastructure, it's not just about bricks and mortar, it's also about technology. If you're talking about getting out of poverty, if you're talking about raising someone's life standards, and you have to be able to figure out how to bring that to everyone, so that they all can live their dreams, whatever they choose to want to be. So for me, infrastructure also includes that as well, and we have to close the gap. And I'm a big believer in going after that as well.
I'm happy to hear that. I think one thing the pandemic really brought home is that broadband and internet now needs to be treated like a utility, just like heat, like electricity. So
Otherwise,
that essential in the day we're living in.
Absolutely. Otherwise, folks are isolated from opportunity.
Yeah.
And of course, I'm a big associated with that is the whole public transportation versus building for the roads and doing less on public transportation. You have to be able to have public transportation is an economic development tool, because jobs are not in the inner city like they used to be. You have to be able to have access points to the opportunity as well. Now, I want to bring more jobs back to the inner city, but recognition is that you need to expand the ability of folks to use public transportation and get where they need to go.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So we're going to shift just a little bit again. So many Americans right now do not feel represented by their elected officials. And that's reflected in a poll in which 84% of respondents said that money has too much influence in our politics. The group Move to Amend wants to override the unpopular Supreme Court Citizens United ruling, with the 28th Amendment that would establish in our Constitution that corporations are not people and money is not speech. And according to another poll, an overwhelming majority of voters, 78%, agree and believe that we need sweeping new laws to reduce the influence of money in politics. What do you think should be done to restore Americans' confidence in our representative democracy and to ensure that people's needs and policy preferences are addressed in our nation's halls of power?
Well, I support the constitutional amendment. Citizens United was a terrible, terrible decision. Talking about corporations are allowed to have political speech through their millions of dollars of campaign contributions. So I do support getting rid of the painful results of Citizens United decision. I also believe in the passage of HR 1 and HR 4. You know, the John Lewis Act, which would return us to the pre-clearance of when it comes to this Voting Rights Act, and of course HR 1, which would put, at least with federal elections, make sure that we have sufficient time to vote early, sufficient support systems, the ability to have federal agents watch if there's a threat and intimidation factors, the ability to register the day of the election, just a multi-level of protections. Because what's going on is this, at the state level, is a modern day suppression, voter suppression, that we haven't seen since the Reconstruction, since Jim Crow. And so I do believe that we have to be very aggressive. And I'm one of the ones who feel strongly that we have to go and, on a state-by-state basis, fight against it. Now, the federal legislation will be able to help with federal elections, but we also need to deal with local and state. Like Ohio may not have pushed initiatives like Arizona and Georgia, but they still have rules and regulations and laws that says we can only put one drop box in a county as big as Cuyahoga, while smaller counties across the state of Ohio have one box as well. There is still suppression within the state of Ohio as well that we have to deal with. So we have to be aggressive, and we have to recognize that right now we have to get HR 1 and HR 4 passed, and then we need to do a state-by-state challenging the courts, even though the courts are a little different since Trump's appointee's been put in there. But we have to stop it. We cannot allow to happen what happened in the South during Jim Crow to happen now, or we will be locked in for generations. So it is a major issue, is a threat to our democracy, because it allows for certain individuals to be elected who come with a certain mentality, you know, the gerrymandering and other issues. So I think it's a huge issue that in the next 6 months, I think we need to get through I think the filibuster, when it comes to civil rights and when it comes to voting rights, needs to go at minimum when it comes to those two type of legislation.
Okay, so thank you. We're going to move into another area, and this is one that really did spark a lot of it was a big driver of Trump's 2016 victory, which was immigration. And there are many different viewpoints on in America on immigration that brings up many different questions, like who deserves to be here and what is the right way to come here and what should happen if someone doesn't come here the quote unquote right way. Trump's inhumane and downright racist immigration policies cast a harsh spotlight on what is done in America's name, but they also made visible decades of our nation's complex relationship with immigration. How do you think that America should move forward on the issue of immigration?
I support, and there's many different areas of this. I support DACA. I think we need to have a legitimate, sustainable pathway for the dreamers to become citizens that are within our country. So for me, that's not hard for me when it comes to that. I think we need to do that. I think we also have to be able to make the promise of that is on our Statue of Liberty reflective of everyone, not just white Europeans or folks who, you know, who are the smartest, who are the scientists, what have you. We have to be able to live up to what our Statue of Liberty says when it comes to welcoming. But we need to do it with legitimate rules, laws that are fair. I don't believe in open borders to a point where you don't have a system. I don't believe it would work, particularly in the southern part of our country. We should be able to have a system where people can legitimately seek access to the United States, or a process that is free of discrimination. I am concerned about the not being able to have that system. We've got to be able, and I think Americans want folks to have the same shot of coming in our country, no matter whether they're flying in from Europe or whether they're coming in from the southern borders by walking over a bridge. The migrant children, the flood of young people coming in, we have to fix that. And we have to be able to do it with the compassion and empathy. Connect the families. Let's continue to find the families of the children that from the previous administration were separated. We definitely have to get rid of, and I know President Biden is getting rid of that. Perplexing issue, but it has to be based on compassion, based on the notion that we should not have different standards based on who is at the table asking to come in. So that's how I see it. And again, that's another example where you pay attention to the smart people who are experts. I'm not shy of having an expert talk to me about. I try to be as much of an expert as I can on these issues. I try to do the studying. I try to understand it. But there are people who focus on certain issues that can bring you greater understanding and awareness. So I'm learning more and more about how to best deal with immigration. And so I'm willing to know that I even grow even more in that area.
Wonderful. So, and one of the things that we need to talk about when it comes to people coming in from other countries is, perhaps what our role is in pushing them here. So with that in mind, in our 2021 fiscal budget, the Defense Department comprised about 43% of the total discretionary budget. In 2019, the United States spent more on national defense than the next 10 countries combined. This at a time when we have millions of Americans struggling to get by, our infrastructure is crumbling, and so on. And polls consistently show that a majority of voters support cutting the defense budget to pay for domestic needs. With all this in mind, if elected, would you support a reassessment of America's priorities that would include a sizable reduction in our military spending and presence abroad?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There is so much that can be done within the military budget, recognizing that a good percentage of the spending is not based on it's not really based on what our readiness needs are when it comes to our military responsibilities, but it's also based on, who has the power? Do we really need this warplane? But it's where it's being built that's relevant. And so there is a lot of excess waste because of the industry itself. And I believe it was President Eisenhower told us to watch out for that. So if you really, so the answer is absolutely we need to reduce our military budget, but we don't have to reduce our abilities as a country to defend ourselves and to defend our allies. I don't think those, I think you can do both. And you've got to understand, we have to understand how this whole system has been created, how much money, how people benefit who are the contractors, who are building the planes and building the ships. And I do believe it really takes an effort from both sides of the aisle to be willing to shift money into our domestic development. And I have no worries that it at all makes us weaker. I have no fear of that at all. And I think that that has to be done. Yeah.
Thank you. So we're going to go from that huge global question down to a very private one.
Okay.
So a woman's ability to exercise full autonomy over her life is inextricably tied to her authority over if and when to have a child. Do you support a woman's right to assert full authority over her body and reproductive choices? Or do you believe that there should be limits on a woman's right to an abortion and to obtain effective, affordable birth control? And with your position on this in mind, what actions should the federal government be taking on the issue of women's rights and reproductive freedom?
I have been pro-choice throughout my whole 30-year career. During my time as a state senator, NARAL and other advocacy groups gave me high grades. I believe in a fundamental right of women to choose without constraints. I believe in the ability of a woman to decide what her own personal constraints will be based on her own values and what her own life. But government should not pass laws to say. So it's not complicated for me. I understand all of the arguments. I understand about third trimester issues and timing and viability questions. I'm very familiar with all of that. But for me, what it all comes down to is the decision of the woman under that circumstance in her life without government telling her. So that I've always been that way, and that's my belief. I believe we should that health insurance should allow for contraceptives. I believe in Planned Parenthood's mission, and we should not go after Planned Parenthood and other organizations who support pro-choice, who support access to contraceptives. And I think that in many ways that can be contradictory, where folks don't want contraception, yet then you talk about issue for pro-choice. And so far right has been contradictory throughout their tenure. So I shouldn't be surprised. So I'm a big believer in that. I'm a big believer in health courses at the primary and secondary level, and done with the experts' advice about what's best for a child as they develop. Ultimately, I think it's healthy for us to be clear and upfront about, just how our society looks at childbirth and contraceptives and the right to choose. So that's where I'm at on it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So we're at about 7:55. Do you want to keep going, or should we skip to the last question? Let's keep going. Let's do this.
Let's keep going. Absolutely.
Okay. So in early February, President Biden issued a memorandum aimed at expanding protection of the rights of LGBTQIA people worldwide. And after 4 years of Trump weakening hard-won protections for LGBTQIA people here in the United States and around the world, how can the U.S. government act to solidify full protection and equality for LGBTQIA people?
Well, I do support full protections. And I think the federal government has to lead, because some of our most problematic areas is local and states, certain state and certain localities. I think it needs to send the signal that there is no different standards for LGBTQIA citizens when it comes to military, when it comes to education, rules and regulation within education. I understand that for many, this still remains for the conservatives, something that's very uncomfortable for them. It's not for me. I was a big supporter of, for example, the city of Cleveland's transgender legislation. I was a major advocate. We took too long to do it. And I continue to challenge the administration of why were you waiting? They waited for things to happen in other states that made, in my opinion, made them more comfortable to do the transgender bill here in the city of Cleveland. I was delighted with the gay marriage by the US Supreme Court, the decision on gay marriage. I have friends and family who are gay or lesbian as well. And so I say that to say that helps you to understand from the very beginning that this is not a choice. This is not where someone wakes up one morning and decides to be a lesbian. You really understand that when you see it up close. And I was born in the late 50s, so I grew up in the era where that was not something that was understandable by a lot of folks. They were still thinking that that was a choice, and I've learned up close by having members of my extended family and friends, and so I support full integration of our citizens into our society without hesitation. And the LGBTQIA knows that those who know what my legislation, where I was on legislation, where I was when it comes to these issues, that I've never wavered from that issue. And I'll be one of the major advocates in Congress to remove barriers that exist and strengthen the laws we do have, so that the integration in our systems continues, and that we don't make those illogical, irrelevant standards simply because of a lack of understanding and certain irrational fears that exist.
Thank you.
Mhm.
All right. So according to a recent poll, the number of Americans who favor legalizing marijuana is at an all-time high. And that pun is intended. 68%. With the understanding that the widespread use of marijuana has made enforcement of its prohibition increasingly challenging, and some states have already legalized marijuana so as to shift regulation and taxation. This has the added benefit of decreasing the harm done to people convicted of marijuana-related activities, which disproportionately impacts people of color, particularly Black Americans. However, the state-by-state solution is proving to be problematic due to how easy it is to transport marijuana without detection. With this context in mind, what do you think about legalizing marijuana at the federal level?
I think we need to do it. I think the decriminalization of marijuana use is overdue. And there's a number of reasons why. I think that the incarceration rate associated with drugs like associated with marijuana use has been a problem, clearly been a problem. I also believe that we should focus on treatment rather than criminal justice solutions to those who use drugs. But I particularly believe that it's better for our society if we decriminalize marijuana, and it's already beginning to happen. And the federal government needs to go ahead and makes that decision so that we don't have this mismatch, hodgepodge of laws where you can go in one state and it's criminal, and then you go in another state and it's not. And I think the federal government needs to act on that. And I would support legislation to decriminalize to marijuana. That's not even a question for me. And I never used drugs or inhaled. I'm like Bill Clinton, I never inhaled, right? So I really don't understand.
Yeah.
It's better not to do it that way.
Yeah. Okay, so last issue question, and then we'll get to our final closeout question. So ranked choice voting, it's been gaining popularity in recent years. Proponents argue that it offers a pathway out of the dominance of a two-party system that excludes different perspectives from our nation's political dialogue and has become increasingly paralyzed by partisan gridlock. Its adoption in both municipalities and states for different kinds of elections is picking up steam. What are your thoughts on ranked choice voting and its usefulness as a tool to help increase representation, expand dialogue, and ease gridlock on the national level?
I've actually started to understand this more and come to the conclusion that it actually, I am in support of us beginning to include this within our democracy. I think it has a potential of being more accurate when it comes to a voter's wishes. In other words, they may vote, they may have the choice for a person, but being able to understand who their second choice is, and it gives you a good, for all the reasons you noted that, folks, I'm buying into that. But I'm recent on it because I haven't been paying much attention to it until the last couple of years, where I've seen that other cities have done it, and now Maine has decided to jump in and do it. So I'm going to watch closer. I'm not against it, but it's a significant change of what we're used to. And with that causes me to just like, let me keep an eye on it, but I have positive feelings about it. If it ever comes up as a congressperson, by then I would have studied enough to know exactly, but I am not against it, but I really like to see more of its application and the results of it. I'm intrigued. I'm intrigued. Okay, yeah.
We need to see like how it actually plays out and if it does actually result in what we want it to do. It's not a cure-all for some of the issues of representation, but every treatment helps.
Yeah, and and if it encourages more folks to vote, I mean, that's relevant as well, because of the significant percentage of folks who are choosing not to vote, particularly in non-presidential years.
Yeah.
If that has a way of showing me that it actually increases people's involvement in the process, then that would be big for me.
Yeah, that would be.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to thank you for joining me tonight. To round out our conversation, I just want to talk about, just to bring a full picture of who you are and how that would translate into our congressperson. So, every candidate brings with them their own distinct combination of experience, and not just political experience, as you've already discussed, but also personal experience and professional experience and community experience. Why do you think that your unique tapestry of experience best positions you to get stuff done in DC that will noticeably benefit the people of Ohio's 11th congressional district and the United States as a whole?
Well, I think that the fact that I am so very familiar with the 11th congressional district, I've lived here all my life. And I've worked here all of my life. My family's actually goes back 120 years. I did the numbers in the city of Cleveland connection when it comes to my generations. And I even have family who's connected to Akron as well. And I've been in and out of there because of that. And so familiarity with the district, I think is part of my experience of just of growing and developing within the 11th district. Familiarity is important. I understand, given the positions I've held as a council member, for example, of understanding at the front lines of public service. I've walked into living rooms of poverty. I've interacted with the homeless and so I've seen it all up close. All of the issues that I spoke with you today about, I've seen the results of gun violence in the streets, having to come to crime scenes and having to go to someone's home after their child was gunned down on the corner and trying to console them. So having experiences with real life faces to the numbers that we talk about. So when we talk about over 100 murders in the city of Cleveland, for example, those are all names, those are all families, and I've interacted with a number of them. So I see that up close. Also, the fact that I've worked at the executive level of government, I've done all three branches, from the judiciary, the executive, and the legislative. That breadth and depth, I think, is so unique in the sense that it's the only one. I'm the only candidate that has that experience. To understand how the judiciary and the legislative and executive all interact, and how, if done right, they change lives and they transform lives. And then being able to work at the state and local level, it's a natural step for me to be able, as a legislator, to be able to go to the federal level. I'm not intimidated by Capitol Hill. I'll be able to hit the ground running. And beyond that is also my experience of a private sector. I'm an attorney. I have practiced law. I have a consulting company that was a government relations campaign consultant as well. I did that when I wasn't in public office. I struggled, I also went through a situation that everyone in this community knows where mistakes were made in my life. I went to prison. I got out of prison, and I was able to rebuild not only my life again, but ultimately the voters returned me to public office because they had, after the Supreme Court has given me my law license, unanimous Republican-led Supreme Court gave me my law license back. They felt I had done enough. And then, of course, I had a county judge, the county administration, criminal justice system seal my record because I had done enough. So that experience of understanding how second chances actually work, when you give opportunities for individuals and then help them along the way, which folks have done for me, that's why I'm a big supporter of reform in the criminal justice system. Because I've been through it all, whether I was on the side of passing legislation to do it, or whether I experienced it myself on seeing what the problems were, or problems are, I should say. So I've had life experiences that I think when it's all said and done, I understand about healthcare, I understand about all the issues we talked about, poverty and the other issues up close. And I think that's relevant. And I think it will help me to, when I sit down, not just to push a button to say, vote yes or no, but when I sit down and try to craft public policy, or defend or fight against public policy when I think is not correct. I think that's relevant. And because of that, I think the depth of my experience, both in public as a public official, but just as a person that life has given me. And I'm a man of faith. Let me end with this. I am a man of faith. I'm a Christian Baptist, and that has helped me overcome the challenges and also have the right mentality on the achievements. I have a list of achievements, from fighting to get rid of poison lead in the city of Cleveland, to $15 an hour, to trying to make how we spend money with professional sports teams versus people living in poverty, and how that contradiction exists. I think it's something that will help me significantly as a congressperson because of my past achievements, and it's my job, obviously, to continue to talk about it through this campaign so that folks understand who I am and what I'm about. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We got through them all. We did it.
Yes, we did. That was fun.
Was
You make it
fun.
easy. You make it
Oh,
easy.
thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us. I'm glad you gave us the extra 10, 12 minutes to let him answer all of the questions that we had, and have a wonderful night. Thank you.